There is a moment most of us have lived, though few have paused long enough to notice it. You are sitting somewhere quiet, maybe the couch, maybe the edge of the bed before sleep, and without deciding to, your hand reaches for the phone. You open an app, and somewhere between that first scroll and the next 10 minutes, something disappears. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing in a house you were already leaving. 7 days. No Instagram, no TikTok, no Twitter. Just 7 ordinary days, stripped of something that had quietly become extraordinary in its grip over daily life. What happened wasn't what most people expect to hear. It wasn't a story of liberation or sudden clarity. It was something slower, stranger, and ultimately more honest than that. The brain doesn't crave the content. It craves the act of checking. Day 1. The hand that reaches on its own. The first day feels manageable. The apps are gone from the phone. Not the accounts, just the doors. The morning passes without incident. Coffee, a window, the sound of the street below. But somewhere around mid-morning, something strange begins. The hand moves toward the pocket. Not because anything is needed, the hand simply moves, the way a tongue finds a missing tooth again and again without being asked. Neuroscientists call this a habit loop, a cue, a routine, a reward, compressed into a reflex so practiced it no longer requires thought. Researcher Wendy Wood at USC found that nearly half of what people do each day isn't decision. It's repetition. The brain has simply automated the reaching. By the end of day 1, that hand reaches for the phone around 30 times. 30 moments of a body following a path the mind had already forgotten choosing. That number is worth sitting with. Day 2, the quiet fear of being left behind. The second day brings something that has a name in psychology but feels more personal than any clinical term. The fear of missing out. Not because anything is actually being missed, but the not knowing sits in the chest like something unresolved. A low hum. A background noise that only becomes audible when the usual ways of silencing it are gone. Here is what becomes clear. The scrolling was never really about the content. It was about managing that hum. Every refresh was a small reassurance. I'm still here. Nothing has happened without me. Social media had become less a place to visit and more a way to regulate something already uncomfortable before the phone was ever picked up. The discomfort doesn't disappear when the apps do. It becomes visible for the first time. And visibility, even when uncomfortable, is the beginning of something honest. We weren't scrolling to connect. We were scrolling to quiet something that needed to be heard. Day 3. The lost art of being bored. Day 3 is the hardest, and the reason is the simplest thing. Boredom. Not the gentle vacancy of a slow afternoon. A deeper boredom. The kind that feels like standing in a room with nothing to look at and realizing you've forgotten how to simply stand. Modern life has made boredom into an emergency. Research from the University of Virginia found that many people, given the choice between sitting quietly with their thoughts and administering mild electric shocks to themselves, chose the shocks. Literally. The mind, untrained in stillness, finds its own restlessness more aversive than pain. So there is a moment of simply sitting. No music, no task. Just a window and the light moving across it. And then something shifts. A thought arrives that would never have had room before. Then another. The mind, given space, begins to move in its own direction. The way water, when it stops being forced, finds its own level. Boredom is not the absence of something worth thinking about. It is the presence of a self that has forgotten it can think. Days 4 and 5, attention returning like a tide. By the 4th day, the craving has softened. Less urgent. Less like a need and more like a habit noticing itself. Things that were always there become visible again. The specific quality of morning light before 9. The way a conversation, unhurried, feels fuller. More like something worth having. A book finished not because there was more time, but because the attention held long enough to carry it through. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying flow, the state of deep, uninterrupted engagement that produces both peak performance and genuine satisfaction. His finding was consistent. Flow requires sustained attention. Sustained attention requires protection from interruption. The attention was always there. It had simply been borrowed, piece by piece, without notice. On day 5, there is a conversation that doesn't drift. No half-presence. Just two people talking, and it feeling nonetheless like enough. It is strange how much that can feel like richness. Day 6, what gets created when consumption stops. Social media doesn't only consume time, it consumes creative impulse. Every polished image, every idea encountered in a feed leaves a residue. Quietly, the brain begins to measure its own thoughts against the curated outputs of thousands of others. An idea forms, and almost immediately the instinct is to compare it. Is it good enough? Has it been said before? That measuring doesn't feel like censorship. It feels like taste. But taste calibrated entirely by consumption eventually stops knowing how to generate. On day 6, something simple. A notebook, a pen, a thought written down for no one. Not for a caption. Just a thought, landing somewhere physical and staying there. The act of having it privately, without the instinct to frame or share, feels like recovering something quietly signed away. Ideas are allowed to be private. This is something worth remembering. We stopped having thoughts for ourselves when we started performing them for others. Day 7. The question underneath everything. The last day arrives without drama. The question that surfaces isn't about social media at all, it's about something older and quieter. How do I actually want to spend my attention? William James, often called the father of American psychology, wrote that the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention, over and over again, is the very root of judgment, character, and will. The neural pathways we use grow stronger. The ones we neglect grow quiet. 7 days didn't answer the question of how to live, but they made the question audible. Not, should I delete my accounts? That's an easy question dressed up as a hard one. The real question is simpler and less comfortable. Am I choosing this, or has it simply become the water I swim in? Invisible precisely because it's everywhere? What actually changed? Sleep improved. The static of a mind that has spent its last waking hour absorbing information it didn't ask for began to quiet. Concentration returned. Thoughts found their endings. Conversations held their thread. Comparison grew less reflexive, and perhaps most unexpectedly, a quality of loneliness decreased. There is a difference between the simulation of connection and the thing itself. Presence, when us unhurried, undivided, turns out to feel like something the other doesn't. The loneliness wasn't caused by being offline. It had been hidden there, underneath the noise all along. An invitation, not an answer. This isn't an argument for deletion. Social media is neither villain nor solution. It's a tool that takes the shape of whoever is holding it. The question is only whether the holding is conscious. Most relationships with social media were never chosen. They accumulated through design that was intentional on one side and invisible on the other, through habit loops that formed without permission. 7 days can't undo that, but 7 days can show what's underneath, and what's underneath is almost always more interesting than the feed. There is a version of a life where attention is given deliberately, where boredom is allowed to exist long enough to become something else, where presence in a room is actual presence. That life doesn't require purity, it only requires the occasional honest question, am I here or am I somewhere else?